Today we're going to look at one of the key reasons it's starting to feel to an awful lot of us like Western civilization might be falling apart. We've been making our way through the 10 Commandments now over the last few weeks, and it's finally time to look at the fifth one. You know, the one that deals with honoring your parents. And this might sound strange to some of you, but even though I've been a father for more than 25 years now, I think I might actually know less about the subject than I did when I first got started. Raising kids certainly hasn't gotten any easier in recent generations, especially now that so much of our culture runs completely contrary to traditional Judeo-Christian values. It's almost as if modern parents have to wage war against the negative influences of the world 24/7, because for a lot of people, the social pressures that fight against your kids go on all day, every day. I mean, you try to curtail it, and a lot of parents still bravely put their foot down when it comes to letting their kids connect to the world through digital devices. But it's not an easy war to fight, because they usually have friends who are allowed to use cell phones and social media at a surprisingly young age. And it can be tiring to be the one parent who says no all the time. I mean, my kids are grown and gone now, and it wasn't easy to regulate the influences they were exposed to back when they were little. So I can't even imagine how much worse it's gotten in the last few years. And you know, the science demonstrates rather convincingly that all that exposure to the world isn't really doing your kids any favors. They might have lots of likes and followers, but they're still shaping up to be the most alienated, lonely, and anxious generation in a very long time. Social media promised to connect us all, and while that's technically true, it's pretty much failed to deliver on that promise when it comes to our emotional well-being. Even old guys like me are exhausted by the non-stop stream of information pouring over my phone, and I'm actually considering getting rid of my smartphone when it finally dies and going old school with a flip phone. So I can only imagine the emotional toll that this must be taking on the young. And of course, if you're parenting, you're also providing, which means you can't be there all the time, especially after the most recent round of inflation, which suddenly made household budgets seem a whole lot smaller and forced a lot more homes to become 2-income or even 3-income families. I mean, what are you supposed to do when you find yourself making decisions between heating the house or buying all the groceries you used to be able to afford on your old income? Now your kids have a lot more hours to be influenced by voices that are always there online. And I can promise you that most of those voices are far more concerned about turning a profit than they are about your children's emotional or spiritual well-being. A lot of them really don't care what your kids are exposed to or what the long-term damage might be. They just want to sell a product. And now you're in a position where exposure to that product is way too available to your kids, whether it's actual physical goods or just non-stop online streaming content. So part of me is glad I'm pretty much done raising my kids, because I see how much tougher it's getting every single year. And of course, now with the benefit of hindsight, I can see and understand things that I couldn't see when I first started out with parenting. I guess I'm a little bit in harmony with Socrates when he said, "The only thing I know is that I don't know anything." All right. I'll admit, that's probably apocryphal. We don't know that Socrates ever actually said that, but it is one of the general ideas you find woven through the Greek philosophy that we do have. To put it bluntly, I think I know a whole lot less at the end of the process than I thought I knew at the beginning. I mean, don't get me wrong, neither Gene nor I were cocky, know-it-all first-time parents, and we put a lot of planning, prayer, and study into raising our kids. So I guess that in some ways I absolutely do know more than I used to, but now I realize just how much I didn't know at the time. And I don't know if you've noticed, but newborn babies don't really come with instruction manuals specific to that make and model. There are general parenting books and the spiritual principles you find in the Bible, but there's no such thing as an instruction sheet for your particular child. You might find strategies and parenting methods that really work for your first child, which tempts you to think that you've mastered the art, but your next child ends up being wildly different and does not respond to the same things at all. Let me give you an example. One night, when our oldest daughter was about 2 or 3, she did not want to go to bed. So instead of arguing with her, we decided to let her stay up. But when she went to go play with her toys, we said, no, I'm afraid it's still bedtime for the toys and they're not available till tomorrow morning. Well, what do you guys do without toys? She asked. Well, we mostly read, I told her, and she was pretty happy with that because she loved to read her children's picture books. I said, but I'm afraid that the children's books also go away at 7:30. It's bedtime for them. At which point I gave her a big, thick, technical manual to read instead. And for a few minutes, she sat bravely on the couch, flipping through the pages, pretending to read it. And that's when Jean and I decided, hey, let's turn out the lights and go to bed. Want to go to bed now, we asked, and her answer was, nope, I still don't want to go to bed. So we turned out the lights and we went upstairs. And just a few minutes later, she was at our bedroom door. Guys, are you awake? And we pretended we weren't. So she went into the bathroom and we could hear her lamenting her bad choices that evening. Nobody read me a story, and nobody helped me brush my teeth, and nobody's tucking me in. And when we found her in the morning, she had her pajamas on inside out. Let me tell you, the next night when we said it was bedtime, we got absolutely no resistance. And I thought at that moment, I must be some kind of parenting genius. Right up until we tried the same thing with our second kid, stupid me. I thought we could use the same approach, but this time, that child loved the idea of being alone in the house, and she basically partied half the night. And that's what makes parenting really difficult. No two human beings are alike, and there's no such thing as a formula that works for everybody. Now, don't get me wrong, there are principles that do work for everybody. But when it comes to the details, when it comes to the specifics, when it comes to applying those principles to a real flesh and blood human being, it just doesn't always work that way. Which brings me to the matter of the fifth commandment, which I'm guessing a lot of you probably know by heart. Here's what it actually says in Exodus 20. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. And then over in the book of Ephesians, we find this little summary of the commandment written by the Apostle Paul. He says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. And then there's this little note for dads in particular. It says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. You'll notice that Paul sets this commandment apart from the rest by pointing out that it's the first commandment coupled with a promise. Listen to your parents and honor them, and you'll live both a better and a longer life in the land of promise. And that really makes sense, because life always goes better when you pay attention to the wisdom gathered by the generation that went before you. But unfortunately, that seems to be another area where raising godly kids is actually getting more and more difficult. And I'll be right back after a really quick break to tell you what I mean. Don't go away. I'll be right back.
Here at the Voice of Prophecy, we're committed to creating top-quality programming for the whole family, like our audio adventure series, Discovery Mountain. Discovery Mountain is a Bible-based program for kids of all ages and backgrounds. Your family will enjoy the faith-building stories from this small mountain summer camp and town. With 24 seasonal episodes every year and fresh content every week, there's always a new adventure just on the horizon.
Okay, we're back from the break, and I'm about to start unpacking the fifth commandment. But before I do that, let me ask you a little favor. The organization that produces this show has been self-funded for more than 95 years, and God has really blessed the Voice of Prophecy. But if you've been listening and you appreciate the stuff we're talking about, would you consider heading over to our website to help us keep this going? Just go to VOP.com and click on the bright orange Donate button. And anything you can do to help us would be greatly appreciated. I know times are tough and budgets are tight, but absolutely anything you could do, that would really help. All right, back to the 10 Commandments, and the fifth one in particular now. In another episode, I said that most modern evangelical Christians place the fifth commandment on the second table of commandments because it seems to fit with the other commandments that outline our duty to other human beings. And that makes really good sense because the Bible never actually tells us which commandments belong on which table. There's no numbering provided, and there are no clear categories. But in recent years, I've started putting the fifth commandment on the first table, like a lot of ancient rabbis. Because even though our parents are obviously fallible human beings, just like you and me, trust me, nobody knows how fallible you are like your kids, it's not exactly a horizontal relationship. It's not quite like the one you have with other people. During your childhood, your parents are above you in terms of authority. And so, over the years, Christian thinkers have understood that parents are really a stand-in for the presence of God in a child's life. Before a child really develops the ability to think in abstract terms, they rely on the more concrete elements of life to develop their understanding of how the world works. And the ultimate authority figures in a child's life would be mom and dad. I actually remember when I was really little and learning to read, my parents gave me an illustrated book of Bible stories. And there was this one picture of Jesus and the disciples loading up a fishing boat. I already knew which of the men in the picture was supposed to be Jesus, but I really didn't know which of the disciples was supposed to be which until I saw one disciple with dark curly hair and a beard. I thought, and I'm little, that must be God the Father because my dad has dark curly hair and a beard. If God is a father, well, I already knew what a father was because I had one, and so my 3-year-old brain just equated the two. And really that's the way it is with most small children. When they hear about God, they're going to process that information by mentally tying it to something they already know. And in most cases, that's going to be their parents. Which means that parents have a sacred responsibility to represent God's values to those kids as faithfully as they can. You're not just mom or dad in that case, you're also a picture of God for that child. Of course, there are times when that can be really confusing because parents are wildly imperfect, just like everybody else. And worse than that, there are parents who really abuse their authority, which means that those kids are likely to grow up with a skewed image of what God might be like. Of course, all of us fail to some degree or other as parents. That's not what I'm really talking about. I'm talking about the parents who try to use religion as a battering ram to keep their children more compliant, to make them toe the line and serve the parents' own selfish interests. That can have a devastating effect on kids and even remove the next few generations from the pews of the church. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. Even the very best parents will have children who make a decision to turn against God. And if they do that, that doesn't mean that you were a terrible parent. It happens all the time. And even God Himself lost His first 2 children to sin. Of course, if you suspect that you did have a role in driving your kids away from God, there's no such thing as a time machine. And so just beating yourself up about it all the time isn't going to help. What you could do is apologize, then forgive yourself, and decide from this moment forward you will make a greater effort to model God's character in front of your family. And if you're struggling with whether or not you were or are a decent parent, I'll tell you this. There is no such thing as June and Ward Cleaver. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. We've all met parents who seem like they've got their act together a lot better than we do, and we've all seen homes that look like they're achieving perfection. But I can tell you as a pastor, I have the opportunity to see a lot of those families up close and personal. And I can promise you, there's no perfect parent. In fact, a lot of those super parents that you meet, some of them are looking at you and wondering why they can't be as good at it as you are. At the end of the day, we're talking about very fallen, very broken people. The parents are fallen and broken, and so are the kids. And that means there will be mistakes. I can pretty much guarantee that. In fact, I've had to apologize to my kids more than I'd care to admit. But now let's get back to something I mentioned very briefly right before the last break, and that's the idea that there's another area outside of technology where parenting is getting harder and harder and harder by the day. And that's the way that current culture tends to worship youth. I mean, in some ways, I get it. I mean, I'd love to have my younger body back, but maybe not my younger mind. And here's what I find interesting. If you wind the clock back about 100 years, you'll find that young people had different heroes and role models than they did when I was a child. People used to admire explorers and innovators, people like Marie Curie or Charles Lindbergh or Albert Einstein. But then everything shifted and we started to idolize singers and actors. And that makes me wonder, if you were to ask a group of young kids to name a few of the world's best scientists, how many of them do you think could even name one? But then ask them who their favorite singer is, and you're likely to hear the name of somebody who absolutely does not promote the values that once made Western civilization the marvel that it used to be. I mean, when an entire generation begins to venerate people who deliberately sexualize themselves and sing about really bad choices all the time, what did we think was going to happen? Actually, it's worse than that, because at the same time we're asking the wrong people to lead the way for the young, we're pushing away the ones who have actually lived a little, the people who have accumulated a little wisdom over a long and difficult life. Wisdom is with the aged, the book of Job says, and understanding in length of days. But what does our generation do with the elderly? We often push them into a corner and treat them like the Victorians treated toddlers. We tell ourselves these people are better seen and not heard. And in a way, I get it. In a super busy world, you don't always have time to listen to long-winded stories that meander all over the place. And the older people get, the more their stories tend to do that. In fact, I'm only in my mid-50s and I'm already doing it. Jean tells me all the time, I've already heard what you're trying to tell me. So yeah, you're not always going to have the time to listen to your elders, not when life is so hectic. But I will tell you this, you're really missing the boat if you're completely ignoring them, because they've already done what you're presently doing. Most of what you face in life, these people have already faced it. And they still might not know what to do in every single case, and they might not understand the way the world has changed since they were in their prime. But I'll promise you this, you're missing out on a big opportunity to avoid a lot of personal grief if you never listen to what your elders have to say. I mean, most of us finally realize at some point that our parents actually did know what they were talking about, that they were right about most of the things they tried to teach us. Now, when you're 16 years old, you think your parents are hopelessly out of touch, and you might even keep that attitude into your 20s or 30s. But when you hit the final stretch of life, when the finish line emerges on the horizon, that's when you realize you probably should have listened just a little more carefully. All those pop stars I loved as a kid, the singers, the actors, the award-winning athletes, let's just be honest. Most of them never really gave us any decent advice. In fact, a lot of them gave us horrible advice because they were busy making money by selling us their particular brand of hedonism. I'll be right back after this.
Life can throw a lot at us. Sometimes we don't have all the answers. But that's where the Bible comes in. It's our guide to a more fulfilling life. Here at the Voice of Prophecy, we've created the Discover Bible Guides to be your guide to the Bible. They're designed to be simple, easy to use, and provide answers to many of life's toughest questions. And they're absolutely free. So jump online now, or give us a call and start your journey of discovery.
This is probably going to sound a little strange coming from a minister, but the other day I was thinking about something I heard from, well, none other than Ozzy Osbourne. You know, the guy who helped escort a lot of my generation down the wrong path. Somebody told me back in 2020 that I really needed to hear the song he released with Elton John that year. And so I went and looked it up, and it's the chorus that really said something to me. This was written by an aging rocker who's going to face the same ultimate reality as all of us. He's going to die. And at that moment, all of his fame, all of his money, none of it's really going to matter because all of us die the same way, no matter how much popular culture happened to adore us. Just listen to what he says in the chorus of this song. Don't forget me as the colors fade when the lights go down. It's just an empty stage. And then he gives us this thought, which appears in the second verse. He says, yes, I've been a bad guy, been higher than the blue sky, and the truth is I don't want to die an ordinary man. I've made mama cry, don't know why I'm still alive. Yes, the truth is I don't want to die an ordinary man. So, there it is, kids, the end of the road for one of the people that a lot of us used to look up to when we were young. And I know it's just a song, but I've seen too many people die badly now to believe that these thoughts by Ozzy aren't at least somewhat autobiographical. I honestly think there's some truth to his feelings. And if this is where you get your values as a young person or from somebody like him, this is what you can expect to feel when you get to the end of the road. The value systems pumped into the minds of the young over the last few generations have been hopelessly empty. And what nobody ever shows you is what happens to the people who promote these ideas. And here's what I find really interesting. There was some indication a very long time ago that some of these guys were already struggling with the idea of their own mortality. Back in 1971, when I was pretty much just a toddler, one of the members of Ozzy's band, Black Sabbath, wrote a song that kind of bombed on the charts. But it spoke volumes about what some of them were thinking back at the time. I know this is going to create a little bit of cognitive dissonance for some of you, but this was a song from Ozzy about accepting Christ. Yeah, you heard me right. Black Sabbath had a song about accepting Christ. And here's what that song said. Well, I have seen the truth. Yes, I've seen the light and I've changed my ways. And I'll be prepared when you're lonely and scared at the end of our days. Now, compare that to the 2020 song Ozzy sang with Elton John half a century later, where he is at the end of his days and wondering what it means now that the lights are off and the curtain is down. It's as if he somehow knew a really long time ago that the path he was on was headed somewhere meaningless. But of course, he took the path anyway. Now compare all that to the fifth commandment and ask yourself what sources you've been using to build your life. Honor your father and mother, the Bible says, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So, here we are, several generations deep into a world where the wisdom of the past has largely been disregarded. In fact, we seem to be modern-day Jacobins, the people who were determined to deconstruct French civilization in the days leading up to the French Revolution. All these guys really cared about was ripping everything down, mindlessly tearing down the fabric of civilization without asking themselves why it was built like that in the first place. They were promising people liberty, democracy, and equality, but in the pursuit of those goals, they ended up being murderous vandals and thugs. And yet here we are, making the same mistake, a restless and angry generation ripping at the fabric of civilization, blaming the old ways for all of our current troubles, but never really asking ourselves if our current problems might not stem from our rejection of the old ways. I mean, it's not that our ancestors actually got everything right, it's not even close. But to throw away the whole past, to ignore the wisdom of the people who came before us, it's a huge mistake. And I doubt we're going to want to pay the bill when it finally comes due. Instead of mindlessly ripping things down, maybe we ought to consider honoring our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents, looking at the sacrifices they made, and if you're lucky enough to still have them around, asking them why they made the choices they did. I'll be right back after this.
Dragons, beasts, cryptic statues. Bible prophecy can be incredibly vivid and confusing. If you've ever read Daniel or Revelation and come away scratching your head, you're not alone. Our free Focus on Prophecy guides are designed to help you unlock the mysteries of the Bible and deepen your understanding of God's plan for you and our world. Study online or request them by mail and start bringing prophecy into focus today.
Of course, it occurs to me that I might be more sympathetic to my elders than I used to be because here I am cramming for finals. I'm closer to the end of my life than the beginning. That's probably a big part of it. But I'm also at the stage of life where I can now see that I probably should have listened more when I was younger. I can see now that I actually missed a lot of opportunities to pursue a more rewarding life. I mean, you'd think it'd be obvious. If you want to find a better way to navigate life, maybe pull out the maps created by the people who have already been to your destination. But sometimes our stubborn pride can really get in the way. And it's not until we do things the headstrong, defiant way that we realize that maybe we should have been willing to take a little more advice. Now, this might be the most geriatric thing I've ever said. But these days I'm watching the next generation and I'm kind of worried about the future, if time should last. I know that popular thought says that the human race is always evolving and progressing, but to be honest, I'm not really seeing it. Our civilization is starting to put giant question marks over things that were really, really, really obvious to our ancestors, all the way down to the basic facts of human biology. And we can say all we want that everybody's following the science, but you and I both know that our human passions have a way of overriding most of our rational thought. And right now, it's starting to feel like logical thought has been tossed to the side and passion is starting to rule the day. Of course, I wouldn't be the first old guy to harbor fears about the future, but we do have this biblical picture from the last days found in Paul's second letter to Timothy. But understand this, he writes, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty. For people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness, but denying its power. What an absolute shame, because it didn't need to end this way, and it absolutely doesn't have to end that way for you. Honor your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land. Maybe it's time for us to take a look at the past. Not again that everybody in the past got everything right all the time. We have some spectacular blunders we can look at in our history books. But to ask those who have been there, the questions, what would you have done differently? If you had my life now, how would you plan it? What mistakes did you make? What were the things you were glad you did? All of us, almost all of us, have this incredible resource of really good advice that is there. It's the people who went before us. Honor your father and mother, God says, that your days may be long in the land which God is giving you. Thanks for joining me this week. I'm Shawn Boonstra. This has been another episode of Authentic. You want to help more people see Authentic for free? Like, comment, and subscribe, and share this episode. That tells the algorithm you really like the show, which in turn recommends Authentic to a lot more people. Thanks for your support.